Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Story, Director of Talent and Small Business Initiatives at the Midland Business Alliance, and this is Hey Bay City.
Jason Story, we met for the first time at, what was that meeting in Midland? It was like the Midland Navigator.
Through the Midland Area Community Foundation, it's Max Loves Midland, which is an initiative of being able to demonstrate the identity and who Midland is and who Midland aspires to be and how we can connect with people that are already with us and those that we'd like to be with us.
It's so many of the things that you were saying, I was just nodding my head the entire time, like making myself car sick. And I connected with so much of what you said. I met you after and said, hey, let's hop on a podcast. Let's just riff on this idea of attraction retention, because it is such a critical conversation, not just here in the United States, but here in Michigan, looking at us being 49th out of 50th in terms of population growth, but then also us here in the region, and then specifically Midland, Bay City, with these initiatives in place to say, how can we meet this challenge, not just immediately, but in the long term? And so I wanted to sit down and chat with you before we get into the meat and potatoes. So tell me a little bit about who you are and how you ended up in Midland.
Yeah, so I'm a native of Michigan, of Oakland County. I moved away in 2007 to New York, and I lived around the country. Most recently, prior to coming back, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was working with a recruiter in Detroit, looking to be able to come back to the state, to be able to keep the career moving forward, be a little bit closer to family that I hadn't seen in the day-to-day for a long time. And my expertise was a blend in workforce development and hospitality. So that recruiter was like, all right, well, give me some time because that's an interesting blend. But that was what I was doing in D.C., and that recruiter reached out and said, we got something over in Midland, and it's through Dow. And in the conversations that I had with Jim Fitterling and Howard Underliner during the interview, was just talking about attraction and retention as a primary mechanism, looking at hospitality as a key conduit to that, and being able to say, well, what can we do to be able to bring in and keep the people that we'd like to have and the people that we already have. So I started with the Midland Country Club, and now I'm working out throughout the community.
What exactly were you doing in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, so it was a blend. So I was actually a business owner, and that business owner was in a developing corridor, so there was a lot of economic development going in that. I was doing a lot of teaching in the things that we did in that business. It was a charcuterie and Saloon Maria, similar to what we have in like Prost or...
Yeah.
And that got me linked up to the public charter schools in the work that they were doing for workforce development, to be able to equip their people, to be able to go out into the community to be productive. And prior to any experience in D.C., I'd studied psychology, so that was a natural fit for me. So that expertise in organizational psychology, I'll probably scrap this piece, but I'll go back and say what I was doing in D.C. So in D.C., I was in a workforce development space in the public charter area. We were really working on what we did to equip people who were living there with job skills. And also we worked with a lot of English language learners as well to help them learn the language, English, and to be able to teach them contextualized learnings on culture so that they could be a part of the area that they were living in. So I was learning and doing all these things that thought about how we connect the whole and how we take everybody that we have and how we, amplify them in ways that they'd like to be amplified, in ways that they'd like to live their lives. And then being able to think about how we create job skills, create pathways, and create connectivity towards the initiatives within the district. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the makeup and what I came here looking for. I needed to learn how to adapt that here at Midland.
It's really interesting to me, your background and some of that philosophy of almost humans first, then workforce second. Because in Hey Bay City, similar philosophy in how do we acknowledge humans, as people? What are our basic needs? We want to be seen, and we want to be heard, and we want to feel important, like we're part of this community. We want connections, and we want relationships, and that really informs the marketing piece of the effort. And then you look at workforce development. How do we equip these people with better skills, more skills specific to an industry or a future career that they might be interested in, access to higher education through scholarships and programs. And that resonates with me so much. And I love the fact that you're also saying that, because it can be really tempting to say, okay, we have this really critical need, workforce development, programs, when that is such a critical piece of the puzzle, but we also have to meet humans as humans and say, what are the human needs of these people and how do we also fill those? Because you give people skills, best education in the world, but put them in a community that makes them feel like it doesn't care about them, that the social fabric is tearing, and they're going to move somewhere. They're going to take those really, really great skills and they're going to move somewhere else.
Yeah, I love what you're saying in terms of taking a look at, okay, we've attracted and we've acquired individuals and we have them working with us, but we got to think of their non-work activities. And we talked about this when we met. And what are they doing outside of work? A lot of people like to say work-life balance, but it's like, well, if we're dividing it as such, then we're presupposing that we're not alive when we're at work. And I don't think that that's a really good, successful medium to long-term orientation to it. So when people are thinking about their non-work activities, they're exactly right. They're out in the community, they're in a neighborhood, or they live somewhere else. And it's what's the connectivity that they have to those places, and how intentional and how broad is a locale or a community communicating and also inviting and then engaging its individuals. I think you make a fantastic point that we consider things from a workforce development, from a systems perspective, but we got to have a this and that perspective, and we have to connect those systems at the individual level.
John Kaczynski and I were talking after a international hiring event for employers at SVSU, and he said something really great to me. We were chatting after the meeting, and he was like, we're in a phase of our history where people can find jobs anywhere. Yep. Like this job that you have, they can find in almost any city across the country, any state. What makes people want to stay in a place, though, is relationships. And it really struck me, especially coming from like SVSU and, really head into the how do we equip our future generations with employable skills. And he's saying, well, the difference maker is relationships. And I've quoted this study in previous podcasts, but because we're intentionally talking about workforce attraction, retention, I'd love to bring it up again. So Knight Foundation 2010 commissioned a study called The Soul of the Community. Have you heard about this?
No, this is new, so I'm excited to hear.
Okay, so 2010, Knight Foundation wants to find out what elements of a community are most critical to encouraging people to build their lives there, put down these roots and say, this is where I want to live. And so you go into a study like that thinking like the answers are going to be obvious, right? People need jobs and they need to feel safe, throw in Maslow's hierarchy of needs there, name drop that. And they need a thriving economy or places to shop. So it was like 43 cities of all different sizes, 72,000 people, I think. And what was so interesting about the results of that was none of those obvious answers were even in the top three. The top three, number one was whether or not a community makes people feel like they care about each other. Number two was whether or not a community is inclusive of different kinds of people. And number three was whether or not the community is physically beautiful. So public art, thriving downtown, clean, beautiful things to look at. And then comes things like educational system, safety, jobs, etc. And that was so intriguing to me because that's a human first, that support, scientific support for this human first perspective of how do we attract and retain people. Yes, we need opportunities and we need better education. But if we don't have a community where people feel like they care about each other, I'm not going to grow roots in that community. I don't feel safe emotionally. I don't feel like I can trust people around me. And that's a really hard community to live in. So I love this. Human first. How do we meet people where they're at? How do we amplify? How do we feel their squishy human needs? It gets me so fired up.
Well, what's really fascinating to me is I think the evidence is for a paradigm shift in that Maslow's hierarchy is that we're thinking people first because we've been so successful taking care of basic needs
Yeah.
that they're almost a given. And I think that that's a credit to all the infrastructure and all the social systems that we have in play. And I'm not saying that there isn't room to improve, but an applause for that. So I think that's where some of that sentiment comes from is we're looking at a little bit less of those baseline factors or foundational needs, and we're not looking so much at those transactional needs like a compensation package. We're looking at these transformational needs is what does that relational quality look like, and how am I experiencing the world, and how am I gaining meaning through my interactions and things like that. So when we take a look at people's appraisals is that we're kind of bypassing all this stuff because we already have that. And I really like what you said about this sort of aesthetic quality and needing to have things like, I was looking at your post on murals, and there's something similar going on just this past weekend at Art Scene in Midland. And it's like, well, what the heck are we up to so much with these murals? Like, why is that so critically important? And you make this great point is that people need aesthetics, and that represents order and sort of exploration. When we think about the workforce, and this is getting back into the psychology piece, is that people who are temperamentally high in conscientiousness and high in openness, that they're sensitive to aesthetics, and they want to see beauty, they want to be inspired, they want to be able to have their environment giving them feedback or eliciting some sort of response out of them. So that's part of what's so important about being able to do that. I think a second thing with this expression of art is that it shows that we're open to expressiveness, and that's open to interpretation. You were talking about being able to feel cared for. I think alongside of that is being able to see oneself reflected in the community, and then feeling like at the individual or the familial level, you can reflect that right back to the community, and there's a synchrony there.
I have a friend, Jeff Sigler of Revitalize or Die, and he goes around to communities and works with them in terms of building community pride and boards, things like that. And that's something that he talks about a lot, that our physical surroundings essentially set the ceiling for potential. If I walk out of my house in the morning and I live in a neighborhood that's burned out houses, it's broken down, I'm walking to work, everything's dirty, it takes me 45 minutes to walk there because our public transportation doesn't exist or it's not very good. And I'm walking by vacant businesses and buildings that have been just crumbling in on themselves. Even though I might not be thinking every day, wow, I wish I lived in a more beautiful city, it seeps into your unconscious mind and says, well, this is what my life is. Like, this is what I'm surrounded by, and I'm not going to be able to really overcome this. But then as soon as you have a community that visually looks like it cares about itself, I mean, that's blown open this door to say, hey, I want to know more. I was talking to this community group about this public art project, and one of the business owners, they just opened a new business, a beautiful new business, a restaurant. He raises his hand and he goes, like public art, like the mural idea, but I want to know how this is going to make my business more money. Mm-hmm. And I thought about that, and I was like, hey, Tom, you just opened a new business, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, it's beautiful, right? And he's like, yeah. He's like, well, why make a beautiful, more expensive restaurant? Like, it's going to cost you more to make something beautiful, as opposed to just opening the doors and saying, hey, you're sorry about the lights. You might get tripped on during lunch. Don't worry, it's clean water. Like, why did you make it beautiful? And you saw like the gears in the brain start to click, and like, oh, like if we show that we care about ourselves, other people are more likely to care about us too. And I think that just goes in such support of public art. It's like, who doesn't want to live in a community where it feels like mom's putting your art up on the refrigerator and like that sense of pride and that sense of swagger? Even if you don't like the art, like even if the art isn't your jam, like maybe you want paintings of birds, but that's abstract, you can still look at that and say, somebody cared enough about this place to make something like that.
Well, I love the conversation we're having on aesthetics because it's perfectly aligned with the concept of attraction. And we can think about attraction as simply within the workplace, but as we're talking about as well, there's the life that's taking place out of the workplace. And you're drawing a perfect connection there of like, well, it's important to have aesthetics in the workplace as well. You can't just have complete disregard. And well, to that idea, I'd say that people are going to look at things that are either in order or disrepair. And if things are in disrepair, well, the response to that is either going to be, I can put that in order, or that's just too much for me to put in order. And if it's too much for me to put in order, my response to that is like, man, why would I even try? And then you might think to yourself, why should I even try with myself? And that can just become a continually pervasive issue that becomes systemic. And then if that becomes a social conversation, then that gets shopped around, and that becomes part of what people's belief systems are, whether that's in a work setting or whether that's in around the community.
Or they give the response, someone else should fix that. Or I will only be engaged with this community, and I'll only open myself up to a relationship with this community if somebody else fixes that first. And I think in this conversation, momentum is such like a critical feeling. Like people want to be part of a community that's going somewhere. I think one of the big misinterpretations is that in order to attract or retain people, we have to have a perfect community. Every road is perfectly paved, every building filled with just the most immaculate businesses. And while that's absolutely something that we should strive for, what people are really looking for is a place that feels like it has potential. That if I invest here, there's going to be a payoff personally, emotionally, financially, with my career, because I see momentum. I see other people caring about this place. I see the right investment happening. I see things growing. And that's, I think, what makes Hay Bay City, what you guys are doing in Midland, so important. It's that almost like that first initial gesture to say, we see this challenge, and we're putting together a group of people to meet that challenge. And that's exciting.
I agree. I think that if we think of a completely finished product, I don't think that people are necessarily attracted to that because it's already predetermined by other people. There's no real opportunity for you to roll up your sleeves or to put your insignia on it.
Great point.
So when you see opportunity, like you're saying, and I think that this is taking place and has been taking place in Detroit, and being able to say, wow, well, there's an opportunity here. Bring your paintbrush, bring your small business idea, bring your unique self, whatever that may be. We'll figure out a use for it, or we're going to give you a landscape to be able to put it to use. And I think that that's what we have the opportunity to here, is that we've got enough built out. We have a canvas. We just need to be able to show how much awesome opportunity there is to paint, going back to this mural metaphor that we're riffing on.
Yeah, and let's kind of use that to transition to talking about identity. So I think it's really, with public art, it's really easy to say, yay, public art, it's so amazing. And then it turns into cookie cutter public art that so many other communities are doing, and it looks cool. And then all of a sudden, all your walls are covered with beautiful art, sure. But it doesn't feel unique. It doesn't feel like I can look at these walls and get an impression of this community. And I think in terms of attraction and retention, there's a danger there too in saying, look at us, and then you fill in the blank with things that are very well meaning, but really just say, we're just trying to be like everybody else. For instance, come to Bay City because we have great places to live, work, and play. All of that is true, but in the greater context of other communities, everybody's got this little riff on live, work, play, and work, play, live, and work, play, live, worship. And that doesn't really say anything about who we are as a community. And so inherently, we're not attractive because we get lost in the noise. We don't stand out. It turns into a resource race because you say so many great places to live, work, and play. And all it takes is a couple minutes in Detroit to go, well, they have way more of all of that. And so now we lose because of math. And so I think how we win is by saying, this is who we are. These are our people. look at this person and the amazing things that they're doing. Look at this story. Let's build connections. Let's build relationships. And I think that sense of identity then is the best kind of marketing because it communicates to the people who are most likely to value a community like you. I want to be in a community like that or this or that. Yeah, it's about businesses and where I can shop and jobs and things like that, but I need to feel something about the community. And I think identity plays such an important role in saying, hey, people from the outside, this is who we are. And then for citizens, current citizens, it says, this is who we are, guys. Like, go team. It's the pep talk. It's the reminding of like, oh, this is why I'm part of this community.
It's such an important point is this idea of numbers, so numbers, maybe we don't add up to more metropolitan areas, but what we do have is richness and depth, just like anybody else. But what we have is unique richness and depth. And if we can tap into that and being able to look at bringing that to the forefront, I think that when we think about bringing people from the outside, I think that that's a hyper important mechanism. But I also think about what we can do to be able to be additive to the people that we already have. I mean, in the workplace, there's all sorts of employee engagement statistics that indicate that maybe half of the people are actively engaged. So it's like, well, of the people that we have, what if we can just figure out how to get someone 10% more engaged, whatever quotient we want to measure that in, then we can see significant change. I think of that at the community level too, is what are we doing to invite people to the table and giving them something to do at the table, and in taking the people that we do have and just bringing more out of that. I think that there's all sorts of evidence of that when you see large-scale events like we just had with the Memorial Cup. We're about to have that with the Dow Championship. We bring everybody forth, and that's where we see some of that uniqueness. Is, well, one thing that I don't think anybody has, at least this year, is a Memorial Cup that we have that here in Saginaw. We have the Dow Championship coming up in Midland, and some of those things bring people out, and that's what I've been watching since I moved here, is what is it that brings people out? And I think it is that opportunity to create oneness, and that's kind of what's happened when the arena's going crazy, is everybody's on the same team, sort of metaphorically and symbolically, and we're all winning together. And then we leave with that energy, and that can carry forward to that point you were making about momentum. So I think it's about, and that has nothing to do with who's not here. That has everything to do with what we're doing with what we have to work with, or who we have to work with. Yeah. I think that there's lots of ways to do it.
That's part of the reason I'm so excited about all the fishing tournaments that are happening in Bay City. Last year was such a big year for it, and we've got 4 more coming again. And then following year, you got Major League of the fishing world. Sorry, anglers, if I'm screwing all that up. I don't know the terminology, but I'm so stoked about that because it touches on both of these ideas of what brings people out and what is your identity as a community. Mm-hmm. And it takes 1 second of driving over a bridge in Bay City to go, oh, there's a river here. Oh, there's a bay here. And that's such a central part of the community. And then you have these tournaments that come in, that people from all across the country coming in to fish this one of the best walleye fisheries in the world. And on the surface, you can say, well, like, I mean, they're fishing tournaments. Like, why don't you try to do something that can bring 500,000 people every summer? That's not us right now. What is us is fishing, the water, leveraging that identity as a community. And you see how successful that is in the long term. Take like Holland, Michigan, for example, Tulip Festival. Who would have thought that a festival celebrating a specific little species of flower called the tulip would lead to how 1 million people or however many people they bring in over the course of a week. And that has such, the biggest festival in the state of Arkansas is called the Toad Suck Festival. There's a whole story there. I'm not going to talk about it. But it says, when a community says, this is who we are, this is our identity, and then how can we bring people out? Like, what makes people say, oh, I want to experience this? That's magic. That's the magical fairy dust of encouraging the folks who are already there to say, oh, I want to be part of this community. And that, in turn, is attractive to people outside. They're like, what is going on over in Saginaw? What is going on in Saginaw? They've taken over my Facebook feeds. All I see all the time is this Memorial Cup and this mural. What's up with that? That's so critical. And hoping, like with the fishing tournaments in Bay City and the Midland, the Dow Championship, I hope people recognize those events for what they are, beyond just simply the hockey or simply the golf or simply the mural. That, yes, it's those things, but it's so much more.
Absolutely. You could say, well, at the Memorial Cup, what's going on? It's a bunch of people skating on some ice,
Yeah.
with a piece of rubber.
I'm not even into hockey, and that's a Saginaw Spirit game was the most intense sporting event of my life.
Yeah, so like the activity that's maybe taking place might not directly resonate, but the community or that at-one-ment or atonement, it certainly does. And that's why everybody just sort of jumps to their feet when something great happens. They're like, why is everybody doing this without even, you're not even thinking about this. You're just doing it. And then you're sort of feeling that energy of one another. And then it's like the crowd's roaring as one, but you're still, have that individual feeling about you. And you have to ask yourself what's really happening at things like, I'm thinking more locally. And you got to remember, I've only been here a couple of years, but the Potato Festival.
Yes.
I think of Walleye Fest in Freeland. So 2 years ago, I'm driving to my cello lesson, to go, learn this week's, skill. And I'm like, why can I not get into Freeland? What is going on here? And then I see these Walleye Fest signs, and I'm like, okay, that's what's going on. And I'm thinking people are eating a bunch of fish. And then I get into the neighborhood where I'm going to take this cello lesson. I see a ton of garage sales, and everybody is just sitting in their driveways, kind of talking and things like that. I get to my lesson. I said, well, if everybody's having a garage sale, who's shopping at these garage sales? And you might say, well, what is Walleye Fest? And I might say, only knowing what I did, well, it's a bunch of garage sales. But why is everybody partaking in it? It's because it's doing something like you're saying. It's allowing people to come out, to be seen, to connect with one another. And it's the symbol of these things that are bringing us together that have equal significance to what's actually taking place.
The U.S. Attorney General Vivek Murthy, did you read last year's report on our epidemic of loneliness and social isolation?
Sure. And there's all sorts of, I think, reasons for that. I am quite the psychology geek. And I would say that, well, we're coming out of a pandemic where we're all at home. Out of that, there's more virtual interaction taking place. Well, I think we're already trending that way going into that. Work is becoming something that becomes more often a virtual experience. So can we make this a Zoom? Can we make this a Teams meeting? Or can we make this an email? Can we make this a chat rather than a human engagement? And there's some efficiency that can be there. I think we have a lot to learn about what it means to work virtually. Mm-hmm. But I think what it often costs is that relational components. I fundamentally believe that distance creates distance, or distance can create distance.
Yeah. What I love about how the conversation about community and loneliness and social isolation is going is that, especially considering his report last year, is acknowledging just how important social connection is. That it's more than just icing on the cake or something nice to do when you get all of your jobs taken care of and you get every street paved like glass, and you fix everything, and then we can talk about social connections and relationships. And he makes the case that no, this is biological, that the health outcomes of somebody who is lonely is worse than someone who is socially connected and smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yeah, lifespan and health predictors go down significantly.
And the whole first 5 chapters of that book is going into the neurology of what our minds are searching for in terms of health, and social connection is one of the biggest predictors of that. If I feel like I'm part of a community, that I'm socially connected, my brain goes, oh, I have a higher chance of surviving. I can now focus on other things. But you take away that social connection piece, and now my work isn't good. I feel lonely. I self-isolate because I feel isolating, and that's the slippery slope. And now my health decreases, and now I'm not a contributing member of this community anymore. And that's a really hard pit to come out of. And you look at the work of Robert Putnam and his book, kind of seminal book, Bowling Alone, and he's looking at the decline of U.S. society, and he's looking at things like small groups, when people feel connected to a core group of people that are also contributing to a larger community, that's a thriving, vibrant community that people want to be a part of. Talk to me a little bit about what you're working on over in Midland. How are you guys going about this work?
Yeah. Well, so we can think about it maybe in two different ways. Is what are you doing to be able to equip employers, and then what are you doing to be able to connect to employees or our talent or our workforce? So one of the things that we recognize, we have this committee at the Midland Business Alliance that I lead called RAD Talent, or Retain, Attract, and Develop
that's
Talent.
such a fun name.
Yeah,
Everybody's making fun of me. They're like, Phil, you say the word rad more than anybody since 1960.
Yeah.
So
If the opportunity of an acronym, lines up for RAD, you got to take it.
Yeah, if it's a good acronym people can remember, you got to jump
sure.
on it.
And, it's like, all right, well, we recognize that there's a call to be able to be intervening on this or working on it. It's like, well, what's one thing that we could do that would be helpful? We've been talking about people entering or in the workforce that are taking a look at non-work factors, or the life part, as it's commonly referred to. And as we are in our jobs or seeking jobs, there's always a value proposition that the employer provides, and that's through the job description, the compensation package, the environment that you have to work within.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're talking about people making decisions for non-work factors, what do we have available to be able to communicate the value proposition of the community? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that could be of great value for people that, like we're talking about, that aren't in the community, or even people within. So what we're working on is being able to take a look, and we're doing some asset mapping to be able to say, what are all the great reasons that we have to live here and be here? That triad that people are looking at. And then also looking a bit regionally too. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to look outside, just the immediate vicinity. So what if we compile that and we express that through different forms of media that are resonating in today's population, usually some interview and video, short form, et cetera. And what if we compose that and arrange that and get that into the hands of our employers, recruiters who serve our local employers? What if we get that into the hands of the academic advisors in our K through 12 or even college systems that are encouraging people to look at jobs here? And then even the job seekers themselves. And as people are making that decision to join into a workplace or stay in a workplace, let's make sure that as they're looking at what the workplace has to offer, let's make sure that we're simultaneously showing them what that community that they're nested in has to offer. So the goal is to have that tool available by the third or fourth quarter this year, and being able to have that, we have it stated as, a minimum of 100 recruiters, employers, academic advisors, and employees themselves that are aware of this tool and know how to use this tool or leverage this tool to be able to demonstrate a collective value proposition.
I love everything that you're saying, and people are going to make fun of me. Phil, you kept saying, like, I love it. But it's true, because I do. So I'm going to say it out loud. I love when you talk about, like, the word media, because when I work with communities across the country. And my impression has always been, and this is not to fault communities because I know how hard it is to run one, and like all the plates you have to spin and limits to capacity and resources. But what typically a community is like 10 or 15 years behind like a current like marketing trend. Mm-hmm. You see communities still releasing like 4-page press releases and saying, well, we sent a press release out via email. Why didn't you know about it? And what's happening there is a gap in understanding that communication means communicating in the way that people are looking to be communicated with. You can be the world's best public speaker and put you on a stage, and you can go to town for an hour and a half, the best speech the world has ever seen. But if there is not a single person in the theater, in the auditorium, in the seats, the speech does not exist. It had no effect in the world. You might have saved your breath and like watched The Bachelor or something on TV instead. So you have to take the message and put it where the people are, and then communicate that message in the language that they want to be communicated with. And so let's say that you're the best public speaker in the world and the theater is full of people, but you're speaking in a different language, or it's very, very highbrow, very formal to a blue collar like community of people out in front of you. They're not going to get the message there either, because we're all like, I heard you say words, but it made me feel like there's a little bit of elitism there, or I didn't quite understand it, or I was looking for like a 20-minute speech and you took 3 hours and I don't have time for that. And so when you use the word media, I love that because that's the language of communication. Can you say what you want to say in a video that's going to keep my attention? Can you tell me a story? Can you post photos that I would find on Instagram? If folks don't understand that, they can say, well, why are we spending time on a podcast?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are we taking photos? Like, why are we telling these stories? And on the outside, they just see the media. But the depth of it, the foundation of it is, this is how people want to be talked to and talked with. And so we have a responsibility as a community to use that same language and communicate the value. This is the second thing that I love. Communicate the value of the community at the same time improving the value of the community. You have to do both of those things simultaneously if you want to be successful. Sometimes we take this approach towards our community. First, we have to do this, and then we have to do that. And if we took that philosophy and everything, like, we'd have the best sewer system in the world. Meanwhile, nobody can drive to work because it's complete craters in the roads and the buildings have all collapsed in on themselves because we were like, no, man, we got to fix those roads first. We can do both. We have to do both. We have to say, this is why this community is so great and so important, while also acknowledging how we're going to improve it. Let's look at education. Let's look at opportunities. Let's talk to our employers and say, how can we be more competitive as a business community? Like, we have to do all of those things. It's not an either or. It's not like, well, you're just trying to, it's propaganda. It's not propaganda. It's saying, look at all these amazing people. Look at this amazing community. And also, we're working hard to get better. And I think that's a great community. That's a community most people want to be a part of.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, all the effort, that's going to do it, people want something to show for it. And I think you're right, is that media helps tell that story. And there has to be, the ability to tell stories in a dynamic way or an adaptive way, one that's, catered to the audience. Hey, Jason, what do you want to talk about? I said, I want to talk about what you want to talk about. I want to talk about what your audience wants to listen to.
Yeah.
I could have this predetermined sense of here's what I think everybody needs to hear, but that's really just going to perhaps fall on deaf ears, and then it's not so helpful. So I think that one of the things that's occurring is, how are we able to have communities that are agile, like you're saying, is that if the landscape of people listening in or tuning in or paying attention, if that's changing faster than the way that the community is changing or being able to communicate that change, I think that there's an opportunity there to align those two things. I think that the way that people want to be engaged is changing faster than ever. And I think that, like you said, is there's a multiple of mediums that people are looking for. And you got to have that sense of what's the right one for this one piece that we're trying to share out.
Yeah.
You get that wrong, you don't make the connection.
What I want to talk about this, and I want to ask you first, because this is such a critical piece of this puzzle of attraction retention, is like timeline. Sometimes we have a challenge in a community and we need to try to solve it right away, and we're looking at, like, in terms of weeks or months. In terms of timeline, where does your mind go when you think about this challenge of attraction retention? What do we need to do now? Do you approach it like 5 years, 10 years, and we're planting the seeds right now? How do you think about this idea of how long this is going to take?
That's such a big and important question. So I think it's a combination of innovation and also what can we do right now. You can have a big, lofty vision, which you need because that helps unify and helps us identify where we're going. But you also have to figure out what's the next step that we would take that gives us the sense that we're moving forward in a positive direction. And too much of any one thing isn't helpful. Maybe metaphorically, if you're about to embark on climbing a mountain, you might want to take a look at how high the peak is so you can get some sense of what that journey is going to look like and what you need to prepare for. While simultaneously, you need to look at the next step right in front of you. You're going to fall flat on your face. So having that combination of taking a look at what's that broader goal look like, and then what are we doing today to be able to move the needle on that? So if we think about the regional alliance that we have, and Senator Horns, this was part of the conversation that we were both at, is talking about Operation 40K. We're trying to add 40,000 people by 2040. When I think about what it's going to take broad scale to get that, I think we need to be taking a look at what we do for thinking globally as far as what we're being able to do to attract a global workforce, and then what we're doing within that to be able to create a lifestyle that's welcoming for that. So there's two things that I think that have to be there is that there has to be commerce, like you were talking about places to shop. There has to be places to shop that bring products and services that symbolize the familiar culture that you're moving towards. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the community is just not looking too welcoming from a consumerism standpoint. If I can't get the products and services that I'm used to where I've used to live or where my family originates from, well, I'm not really going to be able to have any sort of feeling of connectivity to my culture. I think secondarily, we talked about it a little bit earlier, is that thinking about we have to make sure that people are equipped with the English language. So if we're talking about bringing in people from collectivist cultures, it's usually not just the individual. So myself, I moved back home to Michigan. It's an individualistic culture that we're living in. So maybe that one person's going to kind of be moving around, a little bit of a nomad. In our collectivist cultures, it's a little bit more than that. We might get that person that we're trying to bring in because they have the right credentials or competency that we're seeking for a job. But what about their family? What about their mother, their father, perhaps even their grandmother, the grandfather? They kind of like to be able to stay together because that's more deeply embedded in those values. So we can't just be thinking about the one person that we want to be able to bring into the job. We got to think about how we're welcoming the family. And I think English language acquisition is a key piece of that. So anybody working in the ESL space in this region is doing fantastic work. We need to double down on that. Mm-hmm. But one step further, we need to have the ability to help people become familiar with the culture that they're now living in. Otherwise, there's a separation with their culture that they're coming here with and the culture that they're trying to get used to. Mm. And I think that helps get the flywheel going. I think that's one of the things. You made a point earlier about building communities having lots of pieces to it. Yeah. I think this one does too. Another piece is thinking about, are we satisfied if we have someone who's living here but working elsewhere? Maybe they're working for a corporate company virtually, on their computer, but they're living here. They're going out. They're having coffee here, having dinner here. Mm-hmm. They have their friends here. I think that's one of the things that we have to our favor is that we have a very recreational surrounding around us. It's very easy to have lots of ability to connect to nature and to be able to have a nice social life and have some of that suburban life that allows you to raise a family. Mm. I think that the virtual work is only going to increase. And if there's an insistence that we want people to work here, live here, and play here, as we said earlier, I think that's going to cut us out of being able to get more people than we otherwise could.
Yeah. When I think about the timeline of this work of attracting and retaining, I think about it needs to happen forever. For the life of the community, it has to be something that a community is constantly doing. It's not we'll have this program in place for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, and then we're done. Even if we're successful, like we've got 5,000 more people or 10,000 more people here. You can't just stop that work because the world is changing, communities are changing, resources are changing. If you're not growing, you're shrinking, you're opening a gap in terms of competition then, all these things. So I think this has to be something that a community does forever in some way, in some capacity. And then I think about growing up, my dad was a farmer, or a gardener. I had this huge backyard garden. I said farmer first because that's more what this garden was. This wasn't just your 6x6 little plot where you grew some beans. Literally half of our backyard was a garden. He would start during the early spring when it's still frosty outside, and on the workbench in the garage, he would set up his little seed beds with the tarp and the grow lights. Every little plant that he wanted to have in his garden, he would start in the garage in these little seed beds. And you look at that and you're like, I mean, you're just kind of putting this seed in the dirt and you're doing this stuff. Like, shouldn't you just like do something else, like more important than that? But what he understood was like that one little step. And then the next day when you water it, and the next day you water it again, and you put the light on, and then now it's growing, and you keep watering it. And now you change the soil, and then you plant it outside. All of those incremental steps over time gets you this garden utopia where me and my brothers would sit for hours and just stuff our faces with green beans and tomatoes. It's that accumulation of progress based on those small attainable steps that lead to success. And I love your analogy of you got to look at the top of the mountain and know about how high it is so that you can plan accordingly. Because you get halfway through and you're like, oh crap, there's no oxygen up here. And if I keep going, I'm going to die. Like, you've reached the end. You will not climb that mountain. You might as well not have started. So you got to know where you're going. And you've got to kind of have a general idea of how long that's going to take, what you got to do, how you got to be prepared. But then you got to send the first email, make the first Facebook post, do the first advertisement, fix those things and make them better the second time around, do this program, fix this program, do it over. And that incremental process is what leads to that success. That 1% rule, like tomorrow you're 1% better. On the outside, people are like, bro, why are you wasting your time? Like, I don't see anything going on here. But if you know you're getting 1% better, the end of the year, 65% better. And then that factors up infinitely if you just keep going. And so this idea that it's more than just hiring one more person, that it's got to be something within the fabric of the community where we say, let's start this process, let's get better every year. And then when you look back in 5 years, 10 years, you have something absolutely world class. And now other communities are going, uh-oh, we're screwed. We got to up our game. And yeah, I love this idea of timeline. Sometimes people get this impression that, well, by this time next year, we'll have 10,000 more people. That's not realistic. That's not what's going to happen. But what is happening now are these really, really critical 1%, 5% better every day little steps.
Well, you make such a good point that, you know, the best way that I think I've heard that idea put is like, plan the work, work the plan. And if you get too in love with one side of those things, it's no good. And I think that that's what you're seeing out of your family garden too, is like, well, we need and want a garden for some obvious reasons. But if we just keep thinking about the type of garden we want, we're spending all of our time asking ourselves, well, what do we want to plant? What would be awesome? Or how can we
or complaining about the plants. Like, I don't like those green beans. You should have planted, X, Y, Z.
Being timid to take a step. Well, what if we plant this and, some pests come in? So you have to be willing to be able to balance both of those things and being able to feel comfortable with adaptation. So you have to have a vision or a stated goal or to see a problem that's worth doing something about. And it can be very helpful to be in groups where you're spending time thinking about what you're going to do or planning what you're going to do. But ultimately, you need to go back and you need to start doing things too. The other thing can happen too is you're just doing things like you're saying about climbing the mountain, but you don't know why. You haven't done enough preparation work to be able to set yourself up or your team up to be successful in that. And then you struggle once you get going. So I think getting that balance right of planning the work and working the plan is hypercritical. And what we're talking about, community development inside the workplace, it's not an easy balance. But I think that it's critical to have success in anything that you're after.
I went to the Regional Housing Summit a bunch of months ago, and they had at the end this panel, and I wish I could remember your name, dude, but they had somebody from the west side of the state, specifically in a housing effort initiative. And he said something so great in regards to this, in that it went something like, we're not so egotistical as to think that our next decision is going to solve the entire problem. But what we do is we make the next best step, and then we say, did that work? And if it did, we do it again or try to do it better. And if it didn't work, we say, okay, that didn't work. How do we do something that works? Or what went wrong? Or what is the one thing that we can fix in this that will start making it work? And I think that's such a beautiful approach to building a community or meeting a challenge in the community, because sometimes we get mired in the emotional part of it. Like, I feel offended, I feel angry, I feel like I'm taken advantage of. And in situations where that is true, by all means, like, please feel those feelings. But we can't just stop at those feelings. We have to acknowledge, I think, first, in an honest conversation, that communities are giant, complicated things. And that means that we're all going to need to act like a community and say, okay, how can we make this better? What is the thing that we need to fix so that we can move forward? If we stop at the identifying a problem, I dare use the word complaint. If we stop there, we all lose. We all lose, and we all feel terrible about ourselves, about how the community sees us, about how we see each other, and that's our future, and that's our fate. But if we take this approach of we're going to do this thing because we see a need and we're trying to fill a need, and then we're going to try to do it better, and then we're going to try to do it better. And if you want to say, hey, I have this idea, this is how we could maybe do it a little bit better, please, let's have that conversation. But if we stop at this, like, well, you're not doing this right, or you could be doing this better, like, nobody wins. Nobody wins at that. Let's all tomorrow get 1% better, 1% better, 1% better. And I love this moment of time here locally in terms of attraction and retention, because we are essentially starting from scratch. We're saying, hey, how can we meet this need in our way, in a unique way, in a powerful way, in an agile way? I love that word, because sometimes efforts like this get mired and the ship is too big, there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and there's just not enough progress. But being light and fast and saying, okay, can we do this? Or let's try this, or let's experiment. I think that's the way.
Well, all those variables that you're talking about point to why it's so important to not get too married to the big plan. Because as you go to carry that plan out, the world's going to have a say. Other dimensions are going to have a say, and you're going to want to be able to recalibrate. And if you're so rigid in the big plan that you predetermine that this is the singular way that we're going to actually do it, we want to be clear on what we want, but I think we want to be more flexible with how we're going to go about it.
Yes.
But I think that we need to be able to connect and be able to express why we're doing it as well. So maybe those three ways of thinking is a helpful way. And as important as it is to have the big, broad plan, it's very important to be able to be adaptive and agile, like we're saying, so that as we encounter change or as we enact the plan, we're in a position to be able to make modifications so that unintended consequences of the effort that we didn't predict for, we don't want to just ignore them because, well, we're going to not pay any attention to that because it's not part of us trying to get to where we're going. And that's going to happen all the time. And we were talking about things that are just innate inside people, is that, well, we're wired to take the next step. As much as I may want to jump across the whole room here, I'm designed to take one step at a time. And maybe I can do that faster by running, but I can't run forever.
Yeah.
So there's an idea of that sustainability and pace and what you can do. So I think that we want to be looking at innovation, or in the sense of like big, giant seismic shifts, and that's very exciting, and that's very inspiring and can mobilize us to effort, but we're still left with taking the next step, like you said, send the next email, do the next task, and it's not as glorious as the big plan. And then sometimes it can be hard to say, is this even really part of the big plan?
Yeah, right.
But it certainly is, and that's where, like you said, the social feedback from other people is helpful in that. Yeah. Otherwise, if you're just in a padded room, it can be much harder to sense whether you're making any difference at all.
You got blinders on and you're just going. I want to try to connect some of these big ideas because I think they're also great. When you said unintended consequences, I think it's important to acknowledge that growth isn't inherently good. It can be good, but it can also be bad. And I think that connects to what you were talking about earlier about this idea of scale and complexity, that communities are complex things with lots of efforts and challenges that have to be met simultaneously. And I think what that does is that highlights the importance of a community approaching and perceiving itself as a community. That I might be in marketing, and that's how I can contribute. That's my lane, that's my strength, that's my talent, that's my wheelhouse. And so I'm going to contribute in that way because I love this community, and that's the talent I can see be put to work. I don't know anything about housing at all. the people that do are way smarter than I, and they talk about things, and I have many friends in this space. They talk about things that I just will never understand. I just go blank. I drink my coffee. I'm silent for the next 25 minutes, and then I check in when they're talking about something else. But just because I don't know anything about housing doesn't mean that I shouldn't contribute. We have to say, how can we all meet specific challenges with the gifts that we've been given over time together? We can't just grow mindlessly. We have to grow equitably. We have to make sure that as we grow, how are we bringing all of our residents along with us? How are we acknowledging and helping those within the Alice population to say, yes, we're trying to grow this community, and what that means is also improving your quality of life. How can we make historically unacknowledged demographics of our community for the first time feel seen and like they are part of us and who we are? We all have to fill those lanes. It's almost necessary to say, well, we're part of a talent attraction initiative or a program. And that can send the signal that, well, that box is checked or that program's going to take care of all of our attraction and retention needs. And I think you would agree with this. That's not true. It's the focal point. It's the tip of the spear. It's keeping the challenge in front of everyone. It's kind of leading the charge. But you need housing in Midland. We need housing in Bay City. Not our lane, not our role. I don't know how to write a pro forma or what kind of incentives have to happen. But putting people in place who do, that's how we move forward together.
Yeah, I think that it's thinking of this as we have a way to make things better, not the way to make things better, and being able to recognize how complex things are. I think that you're absolutely right in this idea of looking to get big fast, as if that's the, we're presuming that to be the ultimate goal or the ultimate value to pursue. And like you said, that doesn't necessarily... that's not necessarily a utopia. And maybe it's not utopia that we seek either, for the same reasons that we said, is people want to be able to roll up their sleeves to contribute to something. So, thinking of how many dimensions that there are to nurture, with one of those things being critical. But I don't think that we ever get away from the fact that we need people to roll up their sleeves and to be able to do what they can do with what they have, with where they're at. And that's one of my beliefs, is that people far and wide, if you can create the right environment for them, like your family was thinking about, well, we have the seed, but we got to make sure that the soil's fertile for it and the soil continues to be fertile for it. And then that seed can grow and it can thrive in the way that it's uniquely designed to be. You're never mad at the raspberry for not being a butternut squash.
Yeah.
How dare you? Yeah, but you're making an environment that allowed probably all those different things grow and thrive together. That's a really good, way of thinking of what we're doing in the community, whether that's at the systems or the organizational landscape, whether that's in the business sector or nonprofit sector. But that's, I think, true at the individual space too. I think that one of the things that we have to be able to be good at is communicating the community vision so that individuals can see themselves in it, and not just see themselves in it, see how they can contribute to it uniquely through the things that they have, within themselves, and be able to make dotted or strong lines in between those two things, and being able to help activate the people that we already have. So I never get too far when I think about talent attraction and retention to not include that middle piece. And that once we have them, we need to actually acquire them. So you can have somebody looking at you and not doing anything about it. Once you have somebody, just like in a relationship or any relationship, now that you're in a relationship, what are you going to do to take care of it? Right. I think about, what do you do to onboard? And these are professional terms. And that's like, how do you normalize the relationship? What are some of the things that we do in the day in and day out together? Yep. And then what do we do to train and develop you? And that's what I think we can take those same practices that are in organizational development and apply them in our community work. Is we have our stated intentions as our, in our region, and then also, within our county levels. How are we making sure that people know what that is? How are we translating it to language, like you were saying, that resonates? And then how are we making the most of what we already have?
I love all of this. Jason Story, man, I'm so encouraged by the work that you're doing. I'm so encouraged by you. I have a lot of hope it gives me a lot of hope when people are in positions of leadership, if you want to call it that, who understand the challenge and are willing to experiment and adapt and think and engage and collaborate and support and do all these things and really try to meet that challenge for a community. And so I'm so blessed by you, so encouraged by you. I want to thank you for stopping by today and having a conversation with me about this topic. We'll have to check in like 6 months or a year or for the rest of forever like we were talking about before, and just check in. So thanks so much for the conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. This is fantastic.
Cut. Heck yeah, dude.